It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Marlene McMillian. You all read the bio about her, but I wanted to highlight a few things. She's going to show us how the principles of liberty affect every area of our lives. She's got extensive scholarly and practical experience. She's a homeschool pioneer, and she has an international teaching ministry. We're going to learn something about how liberty is in the air, and she's going to join us to carry the liberty torch. Dr. McMillian, please come in. Thank you so much.
Okay. You need two things. Yeah, I want this off. Which one? You want me to use this one? Great. Okay, you need two things in your hands. A little card that has two trees on it. And you need to get your seatbelts on. We are going to move, okay? So you need two things in your hands. A card with two trees, a tree of liberty and a tree of bondage and tyranny, and a paper with 3 columns. If you don't have those, raise your hand. We'll try to get you what you need. Okay, let's go ahead, Chris. Okay, people who live in liberty think differently than people who live in bondage. Now, first of all, we could say that people who live in liberty think, right? Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you tonight as people who think. I have a lot to offer you. I'm going to shatter some of your preconceived ideas of some of the things that we've done business that way all these years. And I'm going to let you really have to engage here tonight. This is not just a passive presentation. Okay, now, what we have here are the two trees, the tree of liberty, the tree of bondage and tyranny. One's obviously green and alive, and the other one's dead as a doornail. Okay, now, what I want you to see is that you cannot have the fruit of liberty from the roots of bondage and tyranny. Every idea you ever have will either take you toward liberty or away from it. Every person you ever meet will take you toward liberty or away from it. Every person ever elected, did we just see that right before our eyes, will take you toward liberty or away from it. One of the things I do in my all-day events is I help you articulate very clearly in your mind how is it that people who live in liberty think differently than people who live in bondage. Because a problem cannot be solved at the same level it was created. Now, do you think we have some problems in our country right now? Okay. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a new level of thought of how do we solve those problems. I'm billed as the Lady of Liberty and Forgiveness because there is a connection between those two things. And I mostly speak to international audiences that have ministers, cabinet members, ministers of governments. Sometimes we get the heads of state, the ambassadors, and the apostles and bishops that make third world countries go round. We don't fool around, we move, and we really solve problems on a very high plane. So I'm going to give you some of those ideas. So one of the things I want you to think about is what if what I thought was the solution was really contributing to the problem? Have you ever faced that in your own life? You just keep doing the same thing, thinking it's going to work? Have you ever done something that had good motives, but ended up with unintended consequences? Haven't we all had some of those things happen to us? We meant well, we really did. But what's that definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we have a lot of things called, my summary for them is Save the Country organizations. So that's what STCO is going to stand for. And I'm a fan, I'm a friend, I'm a member, I'm a participant. Okay, so this is a friendly discussion. This is from an inside of those of us who really care about making a difference in our culture. But what have we been doing? We've been active at this, not us necessarily personally, but these Save the Country organizations have been out there for over 40 years. And what have they been doing? So what do? We learn the quotes from the Founding Fathers. Good thing, right? We study the Constitution. Another good thing. I'm not saying these are bad things, but I'm just giving you a quick summary. What have we been doing? We've been doing elections and putting the right people in office. We've been lobbying for good legislation. Good thing again, right? Necessary. We've been doing politics, giving our money and our time. We've been going to church and living a moral life as best we can. We've been even volunteered for the PTA, or we sent our children to Christian schools, and some of us homeschooled. Okay, so we did all those things. We're informed. You're the informed people. Okay, do you ever have any relatives or friends that look at you like, could you just not talk about that today? Okay, I'm in the right crowd. Okay, that's who I'm talking to. So we're the informed people. We know what's going on. We actually know that Benghazi is a place and not a person. Okay, so we listen to talk radio. We watch cable TV. We're on the internet, and we're overall, this group we had a prayer meeting here. Some of you were there. I'm sorry I wasn't there. But, you know, we pray and pray and pray. I even wrote a book about how to call America to her knees. And what else did we do? We really want to save the country. So what did we do? We formed tea parties. Okay? And then we gave more money to the Save the Country organizations. And what do? We rinse and repeat. Right? Okay, now we have to come to a point where we say, after 40 plus years and millions of dollars in effort, is the country better off now or worse off? Worse. Okay, so what's that mean? Either we have defined the problem accurately, and we just haven't applied these solutions sufficiently. In other words, we didn't work hard enough at it. We didn't do it long enough. We didn't spend enough money or enough time. Or we have not defined the problem accurately, and we need a new solution. Are you with me? Okay, let's go. So, now something else I want to warn you about is most people go through life looking for validation more than truth. And sometimes the truth hurts. So, I finally came to the point where I wanted truth more than validation. In other words, I was going to get some things that I wasn't going to like. Okay? I either had to know that all this work that I had been doing and was planning to do was going to pay off, or I had to have a solution, because that would be better than just putting my finger in the dike. Do you ever feel that way? That's what we're doing. I mean, you want the guy out there putting his finger in the dike. Okay, I'm not against him. But at the same time, what are we going to do to plant liberty for generations to come? So you have to look at your goals. Some people's only goal is to stay in office. Some people's only goal is to give you more of the same. And so my goal is to teach you how to plant liberty in your world and around you. So now I want to say this again. A problem can not be solved at the same level it was created. In other words, if the people who created the problem are still telling you what the answer is, maybe we need to look at it differently. So, again, what if the things we thought were solutions, were really contributing to the problem? That's one of our thoughts that's on the table. So, what if while thinking we were furthering freedom, unwittingly we were promoting Marxism? Now, what's that word unwittingly mean? We didn't know, right? Okay, so there's no judgment there. We just didn't know. We didn't understand. We didn't get it. What if we were speaking Marxism while thinking we were speaking liberty? Could this have happened to us? We're the informed ones, remember? So what if while thinking we were raising God-fearing, freedom-loving patriots, isn't that we want our children to be God-fearing, freedom-loving patriots? What if we were really raising good little Marxists, socialist, statist, or just go along to get along citizens who are prey to tyranny? Could that happen to us? Could we do that? Well, we not only meant well, we worked hard. We did what our pastors, leaders of the Save the Country organizations, and respected authorities, in quotes, told us to do. Now, I have to say this because I speak for a lot of groups and I know a lot of people. And many Tea Party and homeschool and Christian parents confess to me that their children don't share their values. I won't make anybody raise their hands, but I do meet young people like this, and their parents, they don't share the values of their parents. So something's awry here. So would you like to know why? How can that happen? So what I'm going to do tonight is show you why, and I'm not only going to show you why, because that deals with the problem, I'm going to deal with the solution. Because do you know you get more of what you talk about? So we don't want to talk about the problem, we're going to talk about the solution. See, there's no blame here though, because we were purposely, well, those of us in this room, see, we were purposely educated to only see things a certain way. We were actually trained in a thought process with a certain purpose. In fact, it's called conditioning. And we were conditioned from birth and trained to be compliant group thinkers. And we're taught to actually believe that our ideas are original ideas with us. In speaking to international audience, I had to simplify the principles of liberty and learn to communicate them to nations that have no historic understanding of these ideas. Now, at first, I thought I was just doing that for them, and then I started speaking a lot more for our young people here, and I'm sorry to say there's a similarity, because they didn't have any background or understanding of liberty and how it's planted in their own culture, and that was here. So what I had to do is I had to go re-examine every preconceived idea. It had to be examined, and I had to separate the Americana from the gospel. That's harder to do than you might think. And I had to develop a language of liberty that communicated liberty for whom English was their third, fourth, or fifth language. Now, this is very important for you because you get to reap the benefits of this in a way I never even saw ahead. See, because in the search for truth, I discovered that there was already a one world language spoken in common by almost everyone in the world. Now, whether you're there speaking French or Chinese or Japanese or Spanish or English, there's a common language that's spoken by all nations of the world. And this language has a name. It is designed to create a world of people who, by speaking a common language, will think alike and demand a one-world economic system, a one-world education system, and a one-world religion. This is what we're up against here in the United States. And Texans, have you noticed, we don't fit in real well with that. So, the thing is, your children and grandchildren already speak this language, and you may be more fluent in it than you ever realized. This language is called the dialectic process. Okay, so a process has steps, right? Okay, so it's a process. And either you become aware of it, or not only are you prey to become its victim, you will actually become its promoter. Again, unwittingly, we didn't know. In order to understand cultural change, you have to understand this dialectic process. What I'm going to share with you will unlock all kinds of cultural mysteries. Because either you understand the dialectic or you become its victim, where it's everywhere. So what is this dialectic? Here's the definition. And I teach in my classes that I will master my subject through the mastery of the vocabulary of my subject. If you're a dentist, you have a vocabulary. If you're a woodworker, a car mechanic, whatever you do, you have a vocabulary. And so this dialectic process has a definition. And the words of liberty have a definition. If you're going to speak liberty, you have to learn the language of liberty. And so this dialectic is the process, that means it has steps, by which a person is moved from a belief in absolute truth to a belief in relativism. The dialectic is the use of the same word to have different meanings for different audiences. Do you ever wonder how somebody gets elected by two audiences that couldn't ever get together? They use the words. Do you ever see Frank Luntz? You know Frank Luntz, the wordsmith? Okay, that's what he's talking about, is how do you get words that appeal to everybody. So the dialectic, though, uses deceit. Deceit means they didn't know. See, once your eyes are open to this is like being taken behind the scenes at a magic trick and finding out how the mirrors worked. How did they cut that lady in half? Well, you know, after you find out how they did it, it doesn't have the same appeal. So the dialectic uses deceit, okay, to change a person's belief system without them realizing. So we're using the same word, had different meanings, and we're using deceit. Okay, so what is this dialectic, again, to summarize? It uses deceit, it redefines words. Has our culture been redefined? Normal's been redefined, right? Okay, so they used words to redefine the way you think. And then it resets normal. Okay, we've got to be very careful about normal, because whatever you accept as normal becomes the new norm or the standard. So the dialectic, it leaves the structure. It kind of looks the same. I mean, they don't go up and take the steeple off the top of the church, or, you know, make the school look like a prison, even though I think I've seen some that kind of look that way. But the dialectic leaves the structure, but it redefines the meaning of the words. So what do? Well, just leave the Constitution in place. Just redefine everything. Right? Hasn't the Second Amendment been redefined? Hey, but we still have it there. But if you change all the meaning of the words, have you in essence changed the substance? Okay, what else? Well, let's leave the Bible in place. Let's just redefine all the words. And nobody will notice. Until you notice, you know, until you wake up or until you see the consequences. So the dialectic's use of doublespeak trains people to be double-minded. Now I'm going to define that a little bit further. So the double-minded man, you say this from James 1:8, is unstable in all of his ways. James says this man cannot expect blessing. Double-mindedness does not bring blessing. But what about a double-minded culture? Confused and constantly changing. Do we have that? We have constant change, all the time, hope and change. Well, what's changing? Now, how many of you know who Stephen Colbert is? Oh, yes, okay. Now, this is what he said on his first program. You can go find this on the internet. And he says, well, anybody can read the news to you. I'm going to feel the news at you. Do you want somebody who feels the news? Well, that's what we're conditioned to do. And he invented the word, what's that say? Truthiness. What's truthiness? Let's define it. Oh, this is so much fun. Look at this. Did you know there is an actual American Dialectic Society? They really do exist. And they named truthiness the word of the year when Colbert started his program. And they defined it as what one wishes to be the truth, regardless of the facts. Now that's been about 13, 15 years ago now, folks. Does this make any sense to you? When somebody says it's the truth, if they don't have an objective standard for truth, they're speaking truthiness. What's ness mean? What's in English? What's the word when you add ness to a word? What's it mean? Sorta, like, kind of, okay? So it's kind of like the truth. Doesn't mean it is. So the ministry of truth in George Orwell's 1984, it's really the, what's that big word? The propaganda department. But now it's called the ministry of truth. You see this? How important this is? Okay? So what happens? What's the responsibility of the ministry of truth? Well, they're supposed to rewrite history, make the new ways look good, and the old look bad. And folks, that includes any people that qualify for that. Okay, the idea is to make everything from the past, anybody who knows history, to rewrite the history of the nation, to make it into whatever the new social engineers want your children and grandchildren to believe about the future. They also redefine words and they redefine normal. Have Have you heard the word new normal recently? It's been on the news all week, folks. This is the new normal, and you're just going to have to adjust. So what a culture accepts as normal becomes the new, what's that? Norm or standard. Be very, very careful what you accept as normal. So now, just to make it plain, the dialectic is how someone's moved from a belief in absolute truth to a belief in relativism. It's in contrast to the didactic. Didactic's a big word for teaching, okay? And that's how God teaches, precept upon precept, truth upon truth, and it is based on a belief in absolute truth. See, part of why these state reps create so much trouble is because somehow inside of them there's still a plumb line, and they still believe that there's some things that are right and some things that are wrong. And it gets them in a lot of trouble with people who just say, can't we just go along to get along? But see, once you understand this dialectic process, it makes everything else make sense. You're going to hear the nightly news differently. You're going to read an article and you're going to hear it with new ears because you're going to have a level of understanding that the average person that's just out there kind of being pulled along doesn't know. Okay, so understanding the dialectic helps you understand social engineering, culture change, continuous education reform, Common Core, propaganda in the media, Agenda 21, and the the environmental movement. It also helps you understand why families and fathers especially are under attack, why church growth has become so popular, and why law has been, has become relative and regulations increased. All of this is explained in there. Now, we don't have time to teach the whole course tonight. It's in a book called Mountains of Deceit, and on page 11, I actually define the dialectic and give you the steps of it. Okay, so the dialectic process resets the norms, values, and ethics of a society. Have we had our norms reset? Have we had our values reset? We've had our ethics reset, right? Okay, so instead of sending selected segments to re-education camps, our whole society is undergoing re-education through media, music, news, corporate training. All of you that have to keep going to corporate training, what do you think continuous education is all about, folks? As well as in our schools and universities. The dialectic process has to rid the students of their parents' values. That's what it's all about. In fact, did you know what the definition of brainwashing is? Brainwashing, you'll never forget this, is washing the voice of the Father from the child's brain. It's washing that voice of God from the child's brain. It's searing their conscience. That's what brainwashing is really all about. And we're being exposed to brainwashing every day. Now, this is from Ephesians, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro. See, the dialectic process trains all adults to be like children. Because a child's life is based on their feelings, right? If they're happy, they're having a great day. If they're miserable, they're having a bad day. It's all about feelings. There's no objective understanding. So, the idea of brainwashing of this dialectic is to turn us from a nation of adults to a nation of children who are all based on how we feel about everything. Do you hear all these TV interviews? Well, how do you feel about that? How did that make you feel? When that happened, how did you feel? Okay? Do you get what's going on? It's not about what happened or what the facts are. It's all about how do you feel? How do you feel? What do you think? Okay, so Ephesians, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men. I also call it sleight of mind. Think about that. It's a magic trick on the brain. And cunning craftiness, whereby they lay in wait to deceive. Is this a new thing? Okay, but you have to understand it. Now, B.F. Skinner said, by a careful cultural design, we control not the final behavior. Now, he means not only the final behavior, but the inclination to behave, the motives, the desires, and the wishes. In other words, he's saying, we are so good at conditioning you that you think it's your own idea. You think you're off acting of your own free will. But we conditioned your culture to get a certain response, and you're just playing right into it because we're really the puppeteer, and you're the marionette. Romans 12:21 says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. See, it's a battle for the minds of men. And part of the battle is to get your mind to be so conditioned to another way of looking that you can't be transformed by the Word of God. So this is one of our key points. And if you don't understand a lot of what I've just said, if you get this will really make a difference. There is a language and method that leads to liberty. And a different, everybody say different. A different language and method that leads to bondage and tyranny. Now, what did we say with your 2 trees? You cannot have the fruit of liberty from the roots of bondage and tyranny. Now, what I want you to do right now is I want you to get your hand out in front of you. And this just looks like a simple little handout. The one with the 3 columns, it says, understanding the language of the dialectic. And these 3 simple little columns, this is made for you to engage. This handout is not made to entertain you, okay? This is made for you to be able to pay attention to. And what you're going to see is on the left, there's the 3 columns, the old order column, the truth column. Now you're going to take this home with you and look at this over the next several days. And you're going to start hearing how people speak. Now, sometimes people don't want to have a conversation around me, and I understand that, because I do listen to what you say, and I can tell whether you're an absolute thinker or you're a relativist. Okay, so look at this, the old world order. You know I listen to what you say. The old order column on the left, the truth column. These are the people who still believe there's good and bad, that there's actual truth versus a lie, that there's right and wrong, and there's standards that are objective. And what's the bottom word on that column? Righteousness, folks. This is a battle between righteousness and wickedness. Okay, now, if you look on the right column, the New World Order is the relativism column. You see that? Now, your Marxist or your cultural changers, your social engineers, they do not come in and say, we're here to take your children away from you, or at least turn them into your enemies. We're here to divide turn the hearts of the children away from their fathers. They don't say that. They don't say, we're here to bring you a world where you have to work 3 jobs in order just to survive, where everybody has to have a smaller house and basically have a lot of change going on in their life, only it's all in decline. They come in and deceive you. So, where are they heading, though? They're heading to a new world where anything goes. Now, what about that word consensus? Con, what's in Latin? What's the word con mean? With. And what's the word census mean? S-E-N-S-U-S. What's feelings with the sensual? So the word consensus means to come in agreement with with that which is sensual. In other words, my feelings rule over any of my facts, and I have no delayed gratification. What is most of your businesses built on? Delayed gratification. You were willing to give up immediate pleasure for long-term benefit. And so consensus is the opposite of that. It's relativism. It is the term utopianism. We're going to have this ideal world. They're not going to tell you how you get there. There's no right and wrong, whatever you want to do, and all of that. And what's the bottom line on the right? Bottom word? Wickedness. It is a battle between righteousness and wickedness. But how do you get from the one to the other? How do you get there? You get there through the middle column of what if? It's the transition column. It's the dialectic process. It is based in fear. That's the hook. Fear is always the hook for compromise. Well, how am I going to pay my bills if the government doesn't pay them for me? How am I going to have this happen? I couldn't get my child an education if I don't get this. Oh, whatever that is, it's based in fear. And it doubts. Did God say? What if? Maybe we didn't understand. Maybe he only meant that that's immoral on Tuesdays. Maybe we can do that the rest of the week. Maybe he meant that if we can outsmart God, then we can do it. Whatever we can think of, whatever we can conceive, we can do. So you have chaos, questioning, and all of that. Okay, now you're going to take this home with you. You're going to look at it, and you're going to start listening. And you're going to start one day realizing, oh no, I just said to that person, can't we just kind of agree to disagree? Have we ever said that? See, I have friends that keep me in line. If I ever slip a little bit, I have those friends that remind me. Okay, now let's go on to the next. Okay, so the summary of that is there's a language and method that leads to where? Liberty. And a different language and method that leads to bondage and tyranny. Okay, this is your most important, if you're writing anything down, this is what I want you to remember. Okay, now, this dialectic process, though, that we just saw, how you get from absolute truth to relativism, it requires groupthink, decisions based on feelings, the approval of the group. Do you ever hear President Obama say something about group salvation? Right? And your identity in a group? There's no constitutional rights to a group. All constitutional rights are individual. So, the approval of the group and the fear of other people over the fear of God, it's when you go to the meeting, even if it's a church, and you think about, oh wow, what's the group going to think of me? And we compromise what we know is true in order for the approval of others. We've all done it. The dialectic is based on relativism and is the foundation of postmodernism. Now, what's that? This is Alan Combs' definition. Isn't he one of your favorite people? Okay. But shouldn't he know? Shouldn't he be a reliable source to understand what postmodernism is? Well, he says it's moving past the Bible and past the Constitution. Okay? Now, what happens? When you accept that this is a postmodern society, this is what you're agreeing to. Oh, well, we've already moved past the Bible and past the Constitution. And folks, most seminarians are being taught that this is a post-modern era. And they're to adjust their theology accordingly. So that was for somebody here. Okay, so to understand the tactics of social engineering, you need to know the difference between two types of Marxism. Now, we're going to give you the opportunity to get a handout from us on social engineering, and Jackie will have at the table where you can get an email address, or you can just go to our Why Liberty Matters and sign up, and then send us an email at contact@whylibertymatters. But we have a handout that really goes into this. But there's two types of Marxism. Now, traditional Marxism uses guns, bullets, weapons, and force to implement their policies and force. You see that word force? Power. Force compliance. It can be, what's that last word? Bloody. But that messes up things. You don't have anybody left to run the power plant. You don't have anybody left, to make a living. It just messes things up. So there's got to be a better way. So the merger of psychology and sociology resulted in what's called transformational Marxism. Now, it's much more convenient and it's not bloody because it uses words, group manipulation techniques, and deceit to, what's that next word? Stupefy the masses into line. I don't know, I just watched a program last night. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't care, I don't know, I don't care. Okay? Where are we being exposed to? We're being exposed to that. So the dialectic has to become normal and accepted by all for transformational Marxism to work. So that's where we are as a culture. Properly done, the people aren't even aware it is happening and are willing participants in their own loss of essential liberties. Now, this is where we're going to get into what we can do about it. Because up until now, we could say, well, it's the other guy. But now we're going to talk about ourselves. See, when we participate in this dialectic process ourselves, we contribute to our own loss of essential liberties. Okay, so I really want you to think about, see, sometimes we like to, it's fun to get together and people, do you realize that the people on the left get together and say how bad those people over there on the right are? Okay, and the people on the right get together and say how bad the people on the left are. And we keep fueling this class warfare deal. But there is an objective plumb line. And one of my statements is that liberty is the plumb line between tyranny and anarchy. And when you have that objective plumb line and understanding of liberty, you will have what you've really been looking for. So what happens is we are unknowing participants in our own demise. We didn't know, we just accepted the new normal. Political correct speech, social engineering, and those things. So, we didn't understand the consequences of our words or why politically correct language mattered so much. Well, why does it matter so much? Because liberty matters. See, if it wasn't so, where did these politically correct police come from? Why are they everywhere? Why are people afraid? Well, I don't know if I can say that. You hear that on TV all the time, and people get publicly cascaded. Oh, wow, that didn't come out right. Publicly reprimanded, let's try it that way. Whoa, that was bad. That could have really gotten bad. Okay, we get publicly reprimanded, publicly made fun of. We get publicly shamed if we don't use the right words. Why? To force us into a form of transformational Marxism, to give up politically correctness is giving up your First Amendment rights voluntarily. Amen. It's making you voluntarily acquiesce that which is your God-given rights. Okay, so politically correct language is essential for transformational Marxists to thrust tyranny on us. It is impossible. It is impossible to speak politically correct and not breach our conscience. Okay, so you're going to have to make a choice now. You're either going to choose your conscience or you're going to choose politically correct language. See, liberty of conscience is essential to establish and preserve liberty. Do you hear much talk about liberty of conscience anywhere? Not anymore. And yet, if you don't teach your children liberty of conscience and raise them to understand that their first domain of government is themselves, they have to govern themselves before they can govern anybody else, and you raise them to preserve their conscience, it won't work very well. Okay, so tyrants, by definition, disregard individual conscience. That's part of being a tyrant, is the conscience no longer matters. And people of conscience, though, cannot be conquered. Tyrants seize power when weak people either give tacit consent, that's by silence. Okay, the word tacit means you just didn't say anything. So you give tacit consent by silence, or you become so fear-driven that you acquiesce to tyranny, you just give up. And folks, it gets tiring. We've been at this for 40 plus years, right? To try to stop tyranny, and yet it keeps coming. So, but that's because we've been trying to fight it on a plane where it really isn't at the root cause. Now, there's a language, and what's the word in red? Method that leads to liberty, and a different language in what? Method that leads to bondage and tyranny. Now, you'll find a few people who talk about the language. You'll find almost nobody that talks about the method. So stay with me here and listen up. See, methods either enforce or negate content. In other words, whatever your subject matter is either enhanced by the method or it's negated, like as in wiped out by the method. So if you have biblical content plus a biblical method, you're going to get liberty. Okay? But if you have biblical content plus a Marxist method, you're going to get Marxist, a little Marxist. Even if the sign on the school says Christian school. We're losing a lot of, even on our homeschool, and I go to the homeschool book fair every year. I speak to a lot of homeschool groups, and I read the curriculum. And folks, the new homeschool moms have been so conditioned in the dialectic that they accept it as normal. And what else is going on is that they only look at content, so subject matter. It has scriptures, or it has constitution information, or whatever content they're wanting, but they don't pay attention to the method. And when you use the Marxist method, you will get a Marxist no matter what your content. See, a Marxist method includes class warfare. And what's that class warfare include? Left versus right. Okay, whenever we participate in the, hey, those guys over there are really bad. Liberal versus conservative, and I know sometimes I can't even communicate with anybody if I don't use those terms. But I try as much as I can. I don't use left versus right or liberal versus conservative unless I absolutely have to. Rich versus poor. There's also, what else is part of the Marxist method? Constant conflict. Do you notice that there's constant riots and constant upset? Why? Because you have to have that agitation. The dialectic is like a funnel, and only ungrateful people fall in it. So you have to have ungratefulness, you have to have constant conflict and turmoil, you can't have any peace. And then you have to have the questioning of authority. Did the policeman really do right? That's what that's about. It's not about whether the policeman did right. It's about getting you to keep you agitated, to keep the class warfare going. It's about, you have to have groupthink. See, liberty is the plumb line between tyranny and anarchy. And when I do all-day events, or especially international events, and folks, they go on for 10 and 12 hours a day for 5 days. Okay, I mean, literally. We hang a plumb line in the room to make sure people really see it. So there is a tyranny of the right as well as a tyranny of the left. I know that's hard for some of us to believe. We think that we only bring liberty to the world. But you have to look at this and see that it can work both ways. See, when we further the left-right paradigm, we are really furthering tyranny instead of liberty. We fuel Marxist class warfare while thinking we are standing for truth and helping our cause. We're undermining the very thing that we say we're for. See, the left-right paradigm, that's the worldview, the frame, this left-right conflict, is a Marxist construct. Now, what's that word construct mean? What's that mean? A framework. It's a mindset. It's a way of looking at things. It's like in an interview, if they try to frame the argument a certain way and a really good, well-trained interviewee says, they redefine the question. They redefine the frame of reference. So this left-right paradigm is a Marxist construct that keeps us from evaluating all sides from the standard, the objective standard of liberty. So tyranny requires to get people to give up liberty and beg for their own oppression and bondage. Now, how many of you know about Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, right? This group knows about it, but very few of you know about where I'm taking this. Okay, it's the playbook for social engineering and community organization. Rules for Radicals is a handbook of deceit, group manipulation techniques, class warfare, and the ends justify the means. And see, once you accept that the ends justify the means, you have moved to the tactics of tyranny, no matter how much you talk about freedom. Liberty cannot be established through deceit or group manipulation. Remember on that chart, you can't get liberty from the right side over there. No matter how much you want to, it's not going to happen. But Alinsky's handbook leads to tyranny because it is a dialectic method based on relativism. That's the fundamental premise of the whole book. Now, Alinsky was a master dialectician, other practical word, deceiver, who hated liberty and loved tyranny. Now, the thing is, this is where I want to take this, folks. that I want you are the people who can make the difference here. There's a move among conservatives, again using that word I don't like using, to adapt Dialectic's tactics to the freedom movement. It's everywhere. Instead of exposing the deceit at the root of Alinsky's method, we are being sucked into using the tactics of tyranny, thinking we can get liberty. Now remember, there's a language and method that leads to liberty, and a different language and method that leads to tyranny. So many tactics and schemes lead to tyranny. You can get to tyranny a lot of ways. There's a lot of roads that lead to tyranny. Tyranny just happens, we often say. But liberty requires conviction and understanding. The principles of liberty are, what's that next word? Immutable. What's immutable mean? They don't change. And they include internal self-government and liberty of conscience. Okay, I deal with that in the book, The 5 Pillars of Liberty. You can look at that on the table. Okay, so liberty starts within you first, and it's first of all internal before it's external. Liberty is a work of the heart and mind before it manifests in culture. So as long as I'm blaming someone else for my lack of liberty, I'm part of the problem. And it's very easy to do. It's very easy to come into that place where we just think it's the other guy's fault and we want somebody else to blame. But that never works. In fact, I get really tired. If I have to try to convince somebody else of something, I feel powerless and weak. But the day I wake up and I go, I can't change them, and I can't change them, and I can't change the way those people do it, but I can be responsible for my choices and my words and my thoughts, then I have a power that can make a difference. And it's a much stronger, healthier position than the blame game. So as soon as I assume responsibility for my language and my method, I become a part of the solution. Isn't that fun? I cannot control how others speak, but I can control how I speak. I don't speak the dialectic. I understand it very, very well. But I'm very cautious now in how I speak because I've been more careful. I can preserve my own conscience instead of succumbing to the fear of others and politically correct speech. Do you think anybody might ever make fun of me, though? Yeah. But I preserve my conscience. Do we always win? No. But we preserve our conscience. And in the long haul, that's a win. I can, though, repent for my own unwitting contribution to tyranny through language or method. Now, if you want to know more about this, if you go to god.tv, that's not god.com, okay, it's god.tv, and you go into the archives, or sometimes it's called on demand. You know how these things are, they change the labels. But you put in my name, and you won't even probably need the word, but there's a presentation on there that explains about the words that are pleasing to God and words that aren't. And it would be something that many of you would get a lot out of. So I can realize that every time I give in to moral relativism, I have participated in tyranny. What one generation, have you heard this before? What one generation allows in moderation, the next generation allows in excess. You heard that? But have you ever applied it to the way you speak? See, when we accept the dialectic in moderation, we doomed our children to a life of tyranny, and we didn't even realize. When we attend a church that uses the methods of the dialectic, we further Marxism. Do you think it's possible for a church to operate on that right side of your chart? Just go look at it and start studying those words. Get on my calls. On Wednesday nights, I have webinars. Every Wednesday night from 8 to 9:30. People call in from all over the world on those webinars. You can get those archives. For the next 3 weeks, we have an extra presentations on Thursday nights also. So we have webinars 2 nights a week. One of them taught by a woman attorney that's just absolutely incredible. She asked the question, where does law come from? God or man? If God, which God? Who wants to talk about that? But she's going to do with it. A former JAG attorney. She's quite an amazing teacher. So, I can recognize the dialectic even at my church and call the leadership to task for the role they are playing in our nation's tyranny. I got to go to a church in California and they repented for 3 hours for even a little bit of compromise about some of these things that were going on they just didn't realize. And it's just unbelievable the things that have happened since then. For the dialectic to succeed, there has to be no place of escape. This is why everybody has to participate, and you can't sign your child out. Everybody has to participate. There can be no place of escape. Folks, when I escape, I help others find a way out. When you're the one state rep who stands, when you're the one person who doesn't do it that way, it only takes one. It doesn't take everybody. When one escapes, it lets the rest of them know that they could have and convicts their conscience if they still have one, or allows the other people who are watching to see what the facts are. So as long as I participate, or we participate in the method of tyranny, we participate in the result of tyranny. In other words, the method always leads to tyranny. It doesn't matter whether the method, whatever the method's applied to, it will always lead to tyranny. Okay. Using the methods of tyranny makes us guilty of aiding and abetting the enemy. Now, this is probably one of the hardest slides in here because we're the people who've been out there fighting and helping and working for truth. We have not consciously done that. But unconsciously, we have aided and abetted the enemy. And we're going to have to look at it and quit blaming somebody else and see it for what it is for ourselves. Now that we know we have been purposely dialected, we must purposely choose to be a person who preserves our conscience. That's an individual choice. That's not a group choice. So a person who preserves their conscience always changes their culture. Now, I'm sorry to say, it might be from a prison cell, or it might be from an inconvenient situation. But when you preserve your conscience, you have one in a place that only you reside. And so I have a presentation called Patriotic Women in Early America. And it's costumed, and it talks about liberty and the individual things that people, the stance that 4 colonial ladies paid in the price they stood for liberty. It tells the stories about the men in their lives too. So it's the men like to hear about what happened when John Adams was away on colonial business and some of those things. But in there, one of the things that is an overriding theme is how if I succumb to whatever the peer pressure of the day is, then I have myself, I cannot live with myself. And so that is really a lot of where we are in this message. Let's go ahead and then let me see how our time factor is. I've just got a few minutes. I will take a couple of questions. This is a book, the cover of Declaration of Dependence, How to Heal Our Nation Through Prayer. These are prayer directives. This is a logic course, a cultural transformation manual. It's used by intercessory prayer groups all across the country. And How to Heal Our Nation Through Prayer. This is the 5 Pillar of Liberty book that also comes in audio, if that's something you prefer. And then this book is on poverty, and this deals with the free or inexpensive solutions to world poverty. And then this is our latest release of Thoughts on Forgiveness. If you're bitter, you're going to attract all kinds of trouble. And as a nation, there's a huge connection between gratefulness and blessing. See, when you're bitter, you repel the very thing you're looking for. And when you're grateful, you attract blessing. As a nation, we used to be very grateful. Thanks of a grateful nation. And now we have a lot of bitterness going on in our country that is hurting our nation. So I deal with those connections. Okay, if we have anybody who wants to ask, make it fast. Okay? Rapid fire, go.
One thing, I just comment, what I hear all the time, and it has driven me crazy, is hater. Don't hate on that, or you're a hater.
Okay.
If you're for the truth.
You have to redefine what love is, or define, really, not redefine, because love is loving somebody enough to tell them the truth. If the bridge is out down the road and I know it, and I don't try to stop the car that's going by, that's an act of hate. So sometimes, see, I just love people. And even if they don't like me, they get from me that I love them. I love them enough to not want them to face the consequences of what they're doing. And so that is very hard, though. That's the new frame. And because we have not stood for definition, for biblical definition, we have fallen prey to whatever the best persuaders are. And so, yes, but I understand the problem, and I believe me. Okay, back there, go.
What do you think about Ayn Rand and her philosophy? Because she's an atheist, and a lot of conservatives, no, you don't like the term, tend to read her and like her.
Well, you have to look at what was the fruit of her life. Did she die a happy person? Did she die a person who, had really brought liberty? I mean, there's some things she talks about, and she uses those words. But see, liberty, first of all, is an act from within. Jesus came to set the captive free, heal the brokenhearted, and set at liberty those that are bound. And I don't think her broken heart was ever healed. So I think you have to look at the brokenhearted part of it. And then you have to look at the fruit. So I deal with this all the time. I deal with how, when you see, the principles of liberty apply in every nation of the world. And one of the things that we have to see as Americans is that those principles of liberty apply to us too. They are immutable. And we've kind of thought we're immune, that we're like, because of our history, we're spatial, and therefore we can breach the principles of liberty, like with Keynesian economics. I have a presentation at ChristianFinancialConcepts.com. If you look up my name there, I have a lot of teaching there, and I'll be teaching for them on Common Core 2 weeks from tonight, and then the next night. Those are international webinars, and you can tune in from anywhere in the world. And one of the presentations on there is called Economics is Inherently Religious, and in that I explain the evolutionary roots of Keynesianism and the connection between national debt and whether you are an absolutist or a relativist. So if you care about economics, if that matters, if that's something that excites you, I basically deal with law, government, history, economics, and education. Okay. You're on.
One more question. You had mentioned that around 1965 we transitioned from relativism and from absolutism into relativism. And it was along that same time that the New Testament was rewritten by a group in New York. And so we went from absolutism into relativism. I wondered if you have any thoughts or apply to the transition from the King James Version to the New
Okay. What you're getting into is when, if you even look at the history of all of these things, I have a teaching about ecclesia or ecclesia that deals with Tyndale was martyred because he would not translate the word ecclesia, E-K-K-L-E-S-I-A, or ecclesia, as church, because church is a substitute word. It is not the accurate definition. A church is normally, and I have a doctorate in church and state relations, so a church normally comes under the state. An ecclesia is a governmental body of believers that has a biblical authority over the powers of the air. Our kingdom is not of this world. Our enemy is not flesh and blood, but the principalities and powers. And I do a lot of teaching about the courts of heaven that deals with solving the problem spiritually before you try to solve it physically. And so bringing that forward, all of these translation issues, as we've had more translations, do we have more memorization of the scriptures or less? Less. Now, if I at 8 could read a King James Bible and understand it, why can an 8-year-old not today? There must be a reason for that, and you get what you expect from your children. So you can still raise your children to understand those things. So that's a lot bigger question, and we deal with some of those things on our Wednesday night webinars. You've been delightful. I think, do I have another minute, or have I used it up? I'm done. Okay, blessings to all of you. Thank you.